Now, of course, there's been a lot said around how we got here and what the way forward looks like. Let's get you insight on what we should make of the back and forth. Bring in our guest, Paul Berkowitz, I hope I'm pronouncing that properly, who is with the Third Republic. It's lovely to have you on the program, Paul. Thanks very much indeed for making time. You know, at the onset of coalitions, we were told that this is a sign of our maturing democracy, but I've always wondered if councillors are maturing at a similar rate, given just the back and forth and many stalls that we're seeing, not only in Ekurhuleni, frankly, but across the country.
Ayanda, thanks for having me. You're quite right. We've had, by my count, 5 or 6 of the 8 metros are coalition governments since 2021, and they've largely been unsuccessful and fragile, and there's been many changes of government. I don't want to agree with you too strongly about the councillors, but there's definitely a problem in forming stable coalitions. And we are seeing, particularly closer to the elections, that party politics are coming into play more. You've heard from Mr. Makubu, the DA and ActionSA are not as close as they could be, and they've got one eye on the elections. But of course, the story in Ekurhuleni is how the ANC and the EFF, who have a clear majority, the two of them, I think it's important to point out, they couldn't share power and responsibility without having to pull in a coalition of minority parties as ground cover. As Mr. Makubu said, the Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni mayors have been figureheads.
Yeah, okay, perhaps mine is too personal an attack, I'll take that. But what do you then put it down to? The inability for these councillors, frankly, to sit around a table and have some kind of agreement, especially, Paul, for residents who I feel ultimately bear the brunt of these disagreements, let's call them.
100% Ayanda. Well, there are many things. Over the last year particularly, we've been discussing legislative changes, tinkering with things like representation thresholds, which other countries with PR systems have, mostly at the national, not at the local level. But if we enforced a 1% representation threshold, you'd lose a lot of the smaller parties, and in theory, you'd have stronger coalitions. But as I said before, the ANC and the EFF between them have a clear majority. They're both really large parties in Ekurhuleni, and they couldn't come to an agreement.
Yeah, you know, I remember that. Please go ahead.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Very quickly, one or two other things, and Mr. Makubu inadvertently referred to it, is that most of these parties are getting their mandate nationally. There's enough evidence to show that the DA-led coalitions, let's say in Ekurhuleni and in Johannesburg, the ones that were in place from 2021 after the election to around 2022, 2023, would have been more stable if the decisions were made at local level by councillors without national interference. And that's true, I think, for most of the parties, but it was particularly glaring in the case of the DA.
Yeah, fair enough.
So that's one suggestion, and that's something that is also there's a precedent in other countries with the PR system, such as many Scandinavian countries.
Yeah, you know, I remember at the beginning the DA making some kind of suggestion around, I don't know, putting a block on the amount of times a mayor, for argument's sake, could be booted through a motion of no confidence. And part of the reason why the suggestion was raised was that, I mean, it almost feels, of course, that these become proxy wars for these different parties who have one or other disagreement during the course of a particular office bearer's time. And I wonder to what extent you reckon that is a possible solution to, at the very least, prevent the revolving doors that we've seen, again, not only in Ekurhuleni, but certainly in other metros too.
That was, Ayanda, that was actually one suggestion that was taken from an examination of other systems overseas, is that once a coalition government is formed at the start of a term, that's what you have. That coalition will stay in place for the length of that administration. It would have been 5 years here. Another one that you raised is to limit the motions of no confidence to 1 a year, which makes it a bit better, because if you've been tracking it, and we have, the number of motions of no confidence and the ones that make it to council and the ones that die before they reach council, it's literally almost every other month. It is literally across the 8 metros. There should be a motion of no confidence on average every month over the last 2.5 years, and it is ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely. Now there's threats of administration, right? Or placing the Ekurhuleni Metro under administration, which involves provincial government, at least for now, swooping in. I don't know, the democratic purists may have an issue with that, of course, right? Because people voted for these councillors to take up these positions. And, if they're not able to get their house in order, that power, if you like, may be usurped by provincial governments. Where do you stand on this idea of when it's appropriate, quite frankly, to intervene?
Well, there's evidence and there's an argument to be made. Place it under administration, sure. I'm not saying I agree. That's the short and simple thing. Ekurhuleni's regressed from a clean audit. They haven't been able to elect a mayor. The deadline's now been extended a second time. But you have to ask, what's the whole point of placing a municipality under administration? It's to fix the problem so that it can then again resume autonomy, make the decisions, spend the budget, hold the meetings on time. And there's a long history, particularly in Northwest municipalities, also Free State municipalities, who were placed under administration. I think Madibeng was placed under administration 2 or 3 times over the last 10 years. It doesn't improve things. And it hasn't been a problem, or it hasn't been on the radar until it started to affect the metros. Mangaung was under administration for, we're not even sure because the information and the gazetting from government wasn't clear, but at least 6 months in 2022, and there's no noticeable improvement. Especially so close to a national provincial election where the Gauteng government, ANC-led, would have maybe 3 or 4 months, or maybe a month, and then there'd be a change of government again. Yeah. So my long answer is I think it's a bad idea.
Okay, at least you're able to commit to a side, because typically what I find is that, it's a difficult line to tread, because it almost seems, at least from where I'm sitting, that you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
It's so true, Ayanda. So back to what you were raising at the beginning of the discussion, I do think we need some strengthening of accountability mechanisms. For me, I don't think it's a radical idea. We should also look at an open list system. You can have a PR system, which is a fantastic system in terms of democratic representation, but the big downside is the power is with the parties and the party structures and not with the people. And all of these political games and temporary coalitions and jostling for power and creating deputy mayor positions benefit none of us except the politicians and the parties. So make the lists open, make the process more democratic. Let's look at all sorts of things. At this point, there are many options on the table.
Yeah, fair enough. And I suppose we'll have to wait and see how the situation in Ekurhuleni unfolds, with great lessons being learned along the way. Paul Berkowitz, great speaking to you, sir. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Paul is with the Third Republic.
Thank you, Ayanda.
We appreciate your insights.